what factors determine the distinction between, you mentioned ultra luxury hotel brands and then luxury. What are the factors that determine the distinction between these two, between the luxury and ultra luxury hotel brands? How does it, I mean, for the viewers who are, and the audience, they might not be very clear that is there a distinction, or is it because of a ultra luxury brand is just smaller in terms of footprint, or how does it, how do you see this?
Yeah, there is actually no definition. And I think, maybe as an industry, we should call upon STR and Hotstats, who are the kind of data experts in this field, to actually create a segmentation, to come up with a rationale for it. Of course, STR's chain scales are based on RevPAR across different regions. So, the easiest way to look at it, Sam-Erik, is rate. So those luxury hotel brands that achieved the highest ADR by occupancy and therefore RevPAR are the ultra luxury ones. So, STR today looks at data for, I think, 127 luxury hotel chains. If you go down that list, you can apply a qualitative measure and say, well, I've been to that brand's hotels, I've looked at them, I've seen the service they provide, I look at the design and the amenities, I look at the quality of the FF&E and the OS&E, and I can just tell that whilst it may technically qualify as luxury according to STR's sort of, data-driven approach, it hasn't got that extra je ne sais quoi. So I think most of us who have knocked around this industry for a while know the hotel brands where you go in and you do get that feeling. I actually recently produced a list of 27. I've previously had a list of 36 that's been reported online, but I took another look at it. So yeah, of the 127, I guess I'm saying 27 of those are the creme de la creme, the cream of the crop. And I think most commentators, most experts, most purveyors of luxury would recognize those brands as having something that makes them a cut above the rest. And that is reflected in their performance on a sort of rev basis. But I think it's also reflected in their performance in terms of the desirability they have towards owners. So ownership, looking at bringing in a flag to, help establish an asset in a city, or has a prime location in a resort destination, will look to match their asset to a brand, and certain brands have a cachet and are reckoned by the consultants of this world, the JLLs and the Deloittes of this world, to help that owner produce a return on investment that, I guess at the end of the day relies on rate and an ability to fill at that rate. So I think there are a number of ways of looking at it, but ultimately to say that one is ultra luxury or another is not is a somewhat subjective judgment. I mean, anecdotally, the famous example of the fact that there are no rules comes from Dubai, where, do you remember the Burj Al Arab sort of let it be known, I think, with a journalist fairly early on in its life, that it was the world's only 7-star hotel. And of course, there is no 7-star rating. There's no 6-star. In fact, even what is a 5-star rating varies from country to country, from tourism organization to grading organization. So it's a very unsort of calibrated world out there. There are organizations like Forbes Travel Guide that try to issue stars using different, more formal criteria, but it's a little bit like the Wild West. So a long answer to a simple question, but we kind of know who they are.
Yeah. I mean, somehow about the ultra luxury brands, I see them as that they tend to limit the growth despite of the market demand, because they want to have this a little bit of an elitist and cater to that 1% of the creative crowd, and also that they are they say they can charge what they want as long as they give to this 1% what they want. Am I off a bit, or do you think there is some logic to what I said?
Yeah, I'm not so sure that the ultra luxury brands are small in terms of number of units because they wish to maintain exclusivity. I think they would love us to believe that was the case. look, we've talked about it a little bit already. The cost today of developing, of acquiring a site and developing, conceiving of design and architecture and then, going through the construction phase and developing all of the fittings and furnishings and staffing for an ultra luxury hotel is huge. You can easily spend 2 million, you name your currency, pounds, dollars, euros per key. And then that adds up to a very significant capital outlay. So the first point is that there's just a limit to the number of opportunities and developers worldwide seeking to put that kind of capital into that kind of real estate. So I think it's actually the real estate side of the hotel industry that's probably limiting the growth rather than the luxury brands saying we only want to have 128 doors. I think if they could grow faster, they would, because at the end of the day, most of these companies, Four Seasons would be an exception, but most of them are part of public companies that sort of have a 15% compound annual growth imperative. So if they could grow faster, I'm sure they would. Interestingly, if you look at those 27 luxury hotel brands that I was talking about earlier, I just did a little bit of maths before we spoke. Between them, this is really interesting, between them, they are operating 795 hotels. But bear in mind that 127 of those are Ritz and 128 of those are Four Seasons. But even accepting those two outliers, those two sort of huge outliers, remember, both of those are twice the size of the third largest operator, which is St. Regis with 62. But right across the 27, the average number of hotels that each of those ultra-luxury hotel brands has open today is 29. So it's a very, very small number. And if we excluded Ritz and Four Seasons from that number, it would fall dramatically, to probably an average of, 15 or something. So you're absolutely right. The brands are very small in terms of number of units in a world where we're getting increasing demand. You talk about the 1%. I mean, that's growing, and it's always 1%, but the amount of wealth that it's capturing is growing. The world is becoming wealthier. Younger people are becoming wealthier sooner. And, if we look at not just the 1%, but the 0.1%, the amount of wealth in that bracket, I mean, essentially the poverty gap is widening and there's a concentration of wealth towards the 0.1, the 1%, the 2%. So I think there's plenty of demand. And what's happened with rates in the last 2-3 years since, the end of COVID in destinations like Dubai, demonstrate that almost hotel brands can price with impunity. There doesn't seem to be any great sensitivity to price. And there's a huge amount of development in key gateway cities like London and New York and Miami and Dubai. So yes, when you get a kind of black swan event like COVID, then, the hospitality industry is a horrible place to be. But, when things are relatively normal at the moment, despite everything we hear about, cost of living crisis, at the other end of the market, people are doing extremely well. And so I think the growth is more to do with the limitations of the real estate side and making these projects pay, which is why, of course, we see a huge growth in the kind of branded residences programs, because that's a way for developers to, get some capital receipts back in during and after the completion of the project and to sort of make the cost of the hotel that they're left with a little more realistic.
Yeah. How do you see how does the mindset of revenue generation differ between ultra luxury and an upscale hospitality segment? How do you see is there a differentiation there or how?
Yeah, I'm not sure there's enough of a differentiation. I think one of the things I was talking about in the conference last week is the sort of homogenization of our brands. We say we have brands in the hotel industry, but if you scratch beneath the surface, I mean, let's look at St. Regis and Ritz-Carlton, both now owned by Marriott. What really is the difference between these two labels? I mean, if you work for St. Regis, I'm sure you'll write in and say, oh, it's this, and this. But, I can think maybe it's Butler's at St. Regis and maybe it isn't at Ritz. But I think to the outside world, there's precious little that really distinguishes these brands, and that's between brands, in the same ultra luxury segment. If you then look at brands between the different tiers, between ultra luxury and luxury, between luxury and upper upscale, between upper upscale and upscale. Unfortunately, I think that behind those doors, behind those kind of branded windows, is a fairly generic machine, churning out fairly standardized hospitality, because that's where efficiency comes from. Yeah. So it kind of suits these behemoths, the Accors and the IHGs and the Hiltons, Hyatts of the world, to have as much standardization. Of course, they'll protest that they don't. They've got brand teams. We're not cookie cutter. But the reality of it is that actually the way we develop hotels, the way we run hotels, the programming that we develop, and then right through into your sales, marketing strategies, your revenue management, it is driven off the same systems, is shoehorned into the same loyalty programs. We'll talk about that in a minute, I'm sure. And I think, in terms of revenue management, what an ultra luxury customer is prepared to pay for different elements of their stay is not something that the ultra luxury hotel brands are really thinking about hard enough. There are conventional ways of earning revenue from a guest night stay, and we tend to apply quite sort of blunt techniques to extracting that money from our guest, whereas I think there are actually much more sophisticated ways that could be done, and that actually other luxury brands in other sectors do.
Yeah, I have read, and I talked to some of my friends about the young travelers who are who are the wealthy travelers. They're also looking at not only them, but there's a sustainable hospitality aspect. The aspect of sustainability are in these hotels, and also the recent glamping developments. For instance, Amman is coming on board with some of the glamping sites, and there are like $5,000 per night experiences. That is, in my mind, quite an ultra luxury experience if you are in the desert somewhere and you have this quite a nice setup, which we call it glamping only.
Oh, for sure. And you only need to look to Africa, to the high-end safari lodges to see this working. It's not new. Brands like Conservation Corporation and beyond, as it is today, Wilderness Safaris, Singita, have been charging some of the highest rates of any hotels anywhere in the world. 20 years ago, Singita was charging $1,000 per person per night. Of course, you're buying a two-day, maybe 2 nights, maybe 3-day, very intense experience. You're paying to see, wonderful nature and animals, not just a room. But I think that goes to prove what people will pay for. Yeah. If you create an incredible, mind-altering, life-changing experience, then people will pay you anything for that. If you're selling 31 square meters or even 200 square meters of suite, and you'll bring the food to the room quickly after you order it, and you'll give the guy a hand with his bag when he's leaving, then you're going to be commoditized and get really what the value of that space and that service is. So, sustainability, new experiences. Experiences is a one-upmanship game. My friend Joe Pine, who co-authored, the Experience Economy book, calls it the been there, done that phenomenon. So however good an experience is, when you have been there and done that, you need another hit. You need the hit to be higher. It's almost a drug. The first hit is great, but then you need double the quantity to get the same effect the next time. And I think what you're seeing with the younger generations to whom you refer is that they've grown up in the experience economy. They have been spoiled, frankly, with exceptional experiences. They've been able to jump on very low-cost, no-frills airlines and go much further than probably you or I did when we were 18 or 19. In fact, my son is 19, has just come back from an incredible 6 months in South Africa, in Kenya, and in Mauritius. My year off before I went up to uni was spent teaching in a school in somewhere in where was it, Berkshire in England. So he is much more experienced at the age of 19 than I was, probably until I was about 30. So they're bringing that appetite and that hunger for experiences to the market as they become wealthier. As I said earlier, we're seeing the younger millennials and even the older Gen Z having wealth and income that their previous generations just never saw, partly because they're making it on the internet, they're making it through Bitcoin trading. You know, they're going on YouTube and being taught how to make money. Okay, I'm talking about my son here a little bit, but what's happening is they're having those great experiences younger, and therefore, you know, in their mid to 20s to late 20s, they want the next level of experience. And so I think those of us who are experienced creators and stagers have to be constantly innovating and evolving to bring them something that's going to make them go, oh, wow, that's new. That was amazing. That's worth me putting on my Instagram story and showing off.
I had as my guest some time ago, Rubin Woodhead, who has, with her husband, White Desert Antarctica. And that is it's an amazing experience what they are creating, and they are doing very, very well. People are willing to pay close to 100,000 US for that 1 week experience. And obviously the logistics and the costs involved and the safety involved and all the meals and everything that has to be put together for the one-time experience for many travelers, that they will make it to that maybe the last paradise of this earth. They're willing to pay that, and she mentioned to me that they are doing very, very well, and people are willing to spend that money just to experience have that experience once in a lifetime. So which shows about what
it does. It shows the market's
something
there.
Special.
Yeah, for sure. You know, if you create something excellent in the experiential domain, people would pay almost anything for it. Yeah. And you know, there are companies like Black Tomato, the Lumiere, you know, these small expeditions that you're talking about, you know, even these crazy guys that went down, you know, in that submersible submarine, you know, they're looking for that ultimate thing. Unfortunately, they paid the ultimate price for that one.